Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and today we're here to answer your property related questions, and to help me do that is Stephen Wayne, owner and founder of Benjamin Stevens Estate Agents. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
And David Galman, property consultant, formerly the director of Galliard Homes. Welcome to you, David.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll crack straight on, and Stephen, your first question is this. I read in the London papers that the London property market is collapsing at a rapid rate. However, looking around and talking to agents with a view to selling my property, they all tell me that the market is pretty stable. Are they right, or are they just putting on a brave face?
Where should we start? Let's talk about the word collapse. I don't think collapse is the correct word, but there is definitely a lull at the moment in the market. There's definitely this very calm air. I'm out at the moment. I've sort of got myself really into it this year and going out and meeting people and going out and doing valuations and trying to understand what's going on. And it's very strange. We're going out, we're getting on nice houses, nice flats that normally we'd wait, our phones would just be ringing off the hook. It's not happening. Rightmove, I can see every Rightmove lead that comes into the company, and it should be 15, 20, 25 a day. They're like dripping in here and there, and it's quite worrying that houses that should sell aren't. Properties in good locations and near good schools, just the oomph isn't there. Then on the flip side, as an agent, you've actually now got to start doing what we used to do 20 years ago, which is picking up the phone and speaking to people. And when you start doing that, things are happening. But I think this natural energy of people would see a house and there'd be this desperate fling to go and look at it has gone a little bit. But then as we're slowly speaking to people, people are going out and viewing, but you're just going to have to, you know, as an agent, we're putting in a lot more work to get a similar level of results. So I wouldn't use the word collapse, but there's definitely a lull in the market at the moment, which is strange.
We certainly see and hear people that we talk to talking that certain spots in London are down 20, 25, even 30%. I mean, that's quite dramatic.
Yeah, but I think what are you comparing those numbers from? So the problem is
well, right in the first place.
Yeah, so the problem is someone thinks their house is worth $1 million, but it wasn't. It was actually worth 8. And the problem is, you know, I see it all the time, but we look on Rightmove every morning and we'll see what's been listed by other agents. And I turn around to the guys in the office and go, am I going mad or are they gone mad? You know, and there are properties where agents are 100 grand out before they even start, and it's almost like a tactic. So it's not that necessarily that the properties are reduced, but they were never valued. And when people talk about it's 20% down, 20% down from what? So I think the problem is, you know, people aren't talking realistic numbers to start with to get to the answer. You know, a property value is only the value of what it sells for, not what it gets marketed at.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is just perhaps affecting it. I don't know what your view is, but we're reading that unemployment, especially with young people, is up. It's on an upward trend. That must dampen people's aspirations as far as work is concerned. And in the past, we've had this joint aspiration, haven't we? Your job gets better, your salary gets better, and so does your house.
I think the world's changed. You know, kids nowadays don't want to go and get a 9-to-5 job. They don't want to follow the conventional lives that we potentially did. You know, a lot of people are looking at, you know, you hear the word side hustle all the time. You know, all the guys that work for me, they've got their jobs and they're doing something else. They're looking for ways of working without working. People are influencers and stuff like that. And I think the world's changed. People want to travel more. You know, people don't want to commit and get married as young as people used to. So there's almost like a different route to life than perhaps there was 30, 40 years ago. And I think that's just a change of culture as well.
Yeah. Okay, David, what do you think?
I tend to agree with much of what he said. The change of culture, the change of lifestyle is huge, and it's just people are not perhaps prepared to take on a mortgage and take on those responsibilities at such an early age.
This is the problem. I'm going to use the word cautiously, but it's the problem with government interference in the market. It's not just one section of the market that needs attention, it's the whole market. And you have to understand how that market's placed within people's...
I think there's also something else maybe we haven't mentioned is nowadays people can work from everywhere. So this obsession of being in the capital has almost gone. People would rather be 20 miles out, 50 miles out, and actually people are now can go to places like Thailand and live for a lot less. And the guys who are young, who haven't got kids, are like, well, actually, maybe I'll take a year out. I can still keep my job. I can still work. I can still do what I'm doing. So there's a real shift in this obsession that everyone wanted to live close to where their families were. People are happy to be outside of London because, you know, you come to London now and, you know, on a Friday, London's dead.
It's very quiet.
On a Monday, people are working 3 days a week. So this demographic and obsession of being close to London and close to transport isn't the necessity it used to be.
On the sort of commercial side of that, you do wonder, I mean, here in Canary Wharf, we've got a lot of the banks, solicitors, got huge buildings, and they're now starting to say to their staff, well, hold on a minute, you know, you want to work at home 3 days a week or whatever it is, but we're paying for this, you know, £10 million a year rent on this building, and you want to sit at home? No thanks, you're coming in. And there's a resistance to that, isn't there?
But people have got used to it now. People have got used to, you know, we've got a block management side of the business, and most of those staff come into the office 2 or 3 days a week. And as an owner, you're like, what are you actually doing? And you call people and they don't answer, and they're like, I've gone for a walk, or I'm doing my washing, or I've, you know, gone to do my shopping. And it's like, well, if you're in the office, you couldn't do that. And people have got so used to this really nice, relaxed way of life. Why would you want to come back into the office, you know, to get on a train for an hour? And, you know, every time we get on the tube at peak time, I turn around to my staff and I see, that's the joys of working in the suburbs. You don't have to do this every day. You know, it's not a nice environment to come into. So you can understand the resistance for coming into London.
All right, David, we're going to move on to your question. I've heard that many developments in London particularly have stalled leading up to and post last November's budget. However, there are some reports of green shoots in the development sector. Is the appetite for building back or not?
I'm not sure it actually went away, the appetite for actually building and development. I don't think it disappeared. I think it just became too extreme to be able to develop. And you see in certain pockets of London where build costs have risen to a level, they're not going to come down again. It's a bit like going into your supermarket during the cost of living crisis. When are those prices going to come down? Well, they're not. They're going to be at those levels, and that will be it. And it's very much the same with building costs, which we've had that conversation before. So it's making many schemes completely unviable. And they're genuinely unviable. I speak to a number of developers in one of my consultancy roles where they're just saying, we can't start that. We can't possibly start that, because if you look at the exit figures and the build costs and the cost of the land, holding the land and so on, it just doesn't work anymore. So maybe there has to be a complete and utter rethink. Perhaps we need to get rid of SIL. We can get rid of the Section 106. Maybe then perhaps developers pay into a fund with an exit tax on every sale. Maybe they pay 1% exit tax on everything they build and sell, and that goes into the central pot to provide for social housing. Because unfortunately, they've put social housing on the private developer for too many years now, and eventually, with build costs going where they are, everything has become unviable.
Yeah. I also, I do think that the authorities have got something to answer here. I mean, with the 106s, for instance, which for the benefit of our viewers, when you're a developer, you virtually commit to the council, the local authority, to do something that's community friendly. Yes. I suppose that's the simplest way of putting it, isn't it? But I've seen down here we've had where the council have insisted on a, you know, £50,000 or £60,000 water feature, for instance, you know. And I mean, I was always brought to believe, if you're a developer, you know, stay away from water because it always goes wrong. You know, the pumps go wrong or whatever else. Just stay away from water. But nevertheless, they insist on these things, or there's got to be a community statue or something ridiculous. And I think we've wasted millions of pounds on that sort of thing. I know one particular council in London that actually, instead of the social housing element that again a developer has to contribute to, said, no, we'll take money instead. Now, they took this money, which was going to come on completion of the first unit.
Yep.
But they actually sold that right to the money to another council who offered them, let's say the figure was 10 million, they sold it for 7 million just to have the cash up front. And there's all those sorts of things that went on that just actually, where the government thought it was going to help, I just don't know, because all the developer does is just puts it on the price of the flats. You know, if they've got 10 million quid extra to pay, then it's just those flats divided into the 10 million quid.
Well, it just becomes part of the viability or the non-viability of these schemes.
Now,
that's the reality.
So I think the moral is here, I think from a developer's point of view, I think we ought to be building, especially in the cases of blocks of flats in London, simpler architecture, straightforward. Forget the swimming pools, forget the squash courts, you know, just don't do it. Let's have just value for money housing. And I think that would spread right across the sector, and I think it would be value to everybody. It would give the first timers a chance, and you'd be paying for what you're getting, not some idyllic lifestyle dream.
I tend to agree with that, and I think that's the way that it's going to go. But it would be actually really good if they could somehow find a way to build houses as well as just flats. It's very expensive to build blocks of flats. In London, I get it, you're not going to have the space to build houses. But how did we do it in the 30s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s? We built all those Smith-built houses, for instance. Or I suppose Smith built them, whoever he was. But all of those houses that were built and areas were created. We need more of that somehow. I'm not sure how you do it. So if I'm saying that, what chance have the government got?
I think one of the worries is that if we push too hard on these rather sort of silly government targets just about numbers, we're going to end up building prefabs and grotty council estates again, aren't we, like we did in the 60s. I think that's the danger, and we'll be creating ghettos.
We need to avoid that, of course we do.
I think we do. Okay, last 20-30 seconds, Stephen, anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's interesting from our point of view, because we've got an investment arm, and we almost see from at the beginning, we have opportunities and plots, and the numbers just don't work anymore. And the problem is people buy things for certain price, and as costs of building go up and costs of labour go up, it just suddenly becomes very unviable. And there's a lot of half-developed sites around London. There's lots of stuff with planning permission, and it's just not getting done. And there needs to be something, because there's these deals everywhere, and they just can't quite happen. Quite happen.
We just can't seem to find the trigger to get going, can we?
That's the big problem at the moment.
Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break, when I'll be asking Stephen and David more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time with Stephen Wayne and David Galman. Welcome back, guys. It used to be the case that one could follow the construction of new tube or overground line projects to identify potentially attractive opportunities in places to buy, particularly buy-to-let investments. But with little or no new projects currently planned, what other indicators of growth areas could an investor look for?
There's 2 parts to that question. So for me, with a buy-to-let investor, I'd always ask the question to an investor, if things got tough and the world ended and life shambled you, would you live in that flat? And if the answer is yes, then it's a good investment. I always feel you should never buy where you wouldn't live, because that gives you an idea. If you want to buy real rubbish, well, you're going to get real rubbish. If you want to buy something nice, and it doesn't need to be wonderful and brilliant, but you know, I've got a flat in an area, and I was young when I bought it, and I went for a stage in between girlfriends, and I lived there for a few, and actually it was fine, and it was nice, and I've always kept that belief that when I look at buying something, I don't want to buy in the worst area, because the worst area will attract the worst type of people. So a good tip is always look at it and go, you know, if I lost everything and I ended up living here, could I survive? And I think that's quite a nice little tip for people. In regards to up and coming areas, so look at the high street is always one of my advices. Have you got Marks and Spencer's coming? Have you got a Waitrose coming? They're really good signals of a good area. You know, in the nicest way, when you see 30 chicken shops in an area, it's not the demographic. You want to go to a place where there are nice restaurants and there's a bit of outdoor living, but people are out on the streets and feel comfortable and safe. But London is becoming, you know, a lot of rough restaurants and a lot of rough areas. So you really can see the up and coming areas, because the big brands, the Boots, also, you know, the Tesco Expresses, they're putting themselves in areas which people are spending money. So that's quite a good indicator. And then the other one is probably schools. You know, I'll tell you a quick one. Where we are in Edgware, there was a school called Krishna Avanti. An average 3-bed semi was worth 350, 400. This school just came, and it was an Asian faith school. And just like that, suddenly we're going to value houses, and they're 550, 600. And what people wanted is to be in that little encatchment. So the prices just flew so quickly. So good schools, and you can obviously find that information out really quickly, which schools are really flying up in the charts.
At the other end of the scale, a lot of buy-to-let investors will say, well, we've come out of London, we've gone north, because the actual return on the property that we're buying, because the capital costs are so low, is actually much higher than anything we can achieve in London. And I suppose with now the Rental Rights Act coming into play, there's not going to be that much difference in tenancy security between council tenancies, which you may take on council people as tenants, as private ones. It's equalising, isn't it? So
I've never had this problem, you know, with council tenants. I've got investments. I'm a landlord. I've got, the most 2 local properties to me, both have council tenants in, and actually they've both been there 7, 8 years. And the council tenants are sometimes more grateful before the opportunity, because actually they feel that when there's loads of people who are interested, they actually feel more grateful that you've chosen them and you've given them the opportunity. You've also got to realise that people fall on hard times sometimes. You've got single mothers who haven't asked for that kind of life. They're not bad people. They're not trying to do the system. They just are where they are in life. And actually the council tenants, because sometimes they're not getting rehoused and they've been a little bit shunned over the years, actually stay in properties a lot longer. So actually it's a viable thing. And actually one of the things we're looking at doing is almost setting up a department where we just deal with those type of people. But you can still be choosy. You can still have 4 or 5 housing benefit tenants come in. And the most important thing about rentals is this here, your guts. Meet your tenants, talk to your tenants, understand your tenants. And actually, if they seem like decent people, rent to them. You can have the most, we've rented to doctors, lawyers, and they've known the system. They've known how to do a landlord out of years of rent. Where actually, it's about having, and the same with what we try and employ with our staff. We hire first on decent humans. The rest I can teach. And it's the same with rentals. Rent to someone nice, someone kind, who's going to look after your property like a home, and you'll never go too far wrong.
The chances are that a local authority tenant is actually going to be much longer stay than a normal private.
90% of the time they're there 4 or 5 years plus, whereas an average rental is maybe there 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, I totally agree. It seems to be going that way at the moment, and I think maybe not so much in London. And if you've got to take the central London zone 1 and zone 2 out of the equation, because that's a different type of tenant, a different type of property. But ordinary stuff where ordinary people like us live, I think it's going to go that way because people are a little bit scared of the Renters Reform Bill.
Just on that subject, I'm not sure with this now having 12 months rent up front sort of business being barred. The problem is that where private tenants usually have to go through a vetting process, usually by an insurance company to see about the capability of paying the rent. The way round that in the past has been saying, well, okay, if you don't match up to quite the qualifications, pay us 12 months up front and we'll just do it that way, because that way we're all safe. That's now got to stop. So I wonder how that will balance the market.
It's one thing from the Renters' Right Act, which I really disagree with, because actually it wasn't hurting anyone. It wasn't damaging anything for anyone. Some of, most of the stuff which has come into the Renters' Right is sort of pretty, obvious, you need to protect the tenants. You can't live not knowing when you're going to be thrown out. And actually a landlord should have a reason for getting that tenant out, not just, I don't like you, or I don't like this, or I don't like that. There should be good, solid reasons.
Yeah.
So I don't have an issue with what's coming. And actually, I don't think landlords should be particularly scared of what's happening. This one with the rent up front, though, it makes no sense, because that was actually in the tenant's benefit.
Yeah.
It's not really, as a landlord,
It helped everybody, didn't it?
It helped the landlords. It gave them a bit of security. But actually, at the end of the day, the landlords are still, over the course of 12 months, still getting exactly the same money. And actually, sometimes the tenants got a discount because they paid up front, or they got preferential treatment because of it. So actually, it's only hindered the tenants and not really the landlords.
And it's going to hurt the student market hugely, because the international students invariably would pay 12 months up front because they couldn't pass muster as a reference. So I'm not sure what's going to happen to that market.
No, I don't know how that works. I don't know. Okay, well, we'll soon find out, won't we, over this next year or so. The government keep referring to huge changes in the planning process, which will lead to faster house building. Do the experts believe these changes will be significant in that cause?
We hope they will be. Whether they will be, not yet. I'm being told that there are improvements in the planning system and things are getting dealt with a little bit quicker. But I've always been an advocate of certain parts of it really need privatising to make it work properly. Some people will say, well, look what happened when you privatise the utilities and so on. But this is something different, where it needs professional bodies and professional people dealing with these planning applications to make everything simpler, to make everything quicker. We've had the conversation lots of times where you've got a piece of land, you get your planning permission, you've got 12 months of pre-start conditions that you've got to satisfy, many of which just don't seem to make any kind of sense at all. And on top of those pre-start conditions, you've now got the Building Safety Act to satisfy, which of course we know we have to satisfy it, but make it simpler and get more people in to actually be able to deal with it. Building Safety Department's just too small. It can't deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk to funders here in the studio, they're saying now what's becoming very difficult is the time it takes from conception to getting the spades in the ground. It can be 12 months, it could be 2 years. But that time still takes funding. It takes interest costs on the landholding costs. You're booking materials early where people want deposits. You've got to start committing to labour contracts. You've got to perhaps do things under the special conditions for that planning. So it's quite expensive even to get to
It's very expensive.
Starting,
I know lots of developers that are stuck in that rut at the moment where they've got a permission, but they can't get anywhere close to being on site. But that then has a knock-on effect. I was chatting to a pal of mine that's an M&E contractor amongst various other businesses that he has. He says, I've got 2 cracking contracts signed with a major developer, not a house builder, a developer. He said, but I don't know when I'm going to start. He said, because they're not ready to start yet. He said, so what do I do? Do I keep my men on? Do I hold them back and stuff? And that's a problem because it's a trickle down effect that affects the market in a bad way.
Yeah. And will your funder support you through that time?
That's the problem.
That is the difficulty because there's no income, is there?
No.
I think. I mean, do you come across this much, Steve?
No, this is why I prefer selling them than building them.
Yeah.
Someone asked me the other day, have you ever thought about developing? And I'm like, I just couldn't deal with all the different aspects you're waiting. It's almost like putting a jigsaw on a puzzle together.
It very much is.
It stresses me out. Listening to you, it stresses me out.
I mean, it always used to be the thing, oh, you're a property developer, you're rich, or you're well off, or one thing. You know, I think you'd have to be a lunatic to go
with that analogy, though, property developers are rich today, but then they put their money into the next project and the next project.
Yeah.
So they might be wealthy, but they're always normally cash poor and asset rich because they've always got their money in the next project.
Well, and again, we've got many of these blocks down here are probably $750 million to $1 billion GDV, and as developers, the developer will find, you know, they have a fairly rushed sort of market at the beginning. It slows down as you go up and you get towards the end, but you can easily end up with 20 or 30 flats at the end.
That could be your profit.
And that's probably your profit, yeah.
The problem is, we've spoken about it before, but unfortunately all salespeople are like children with shiny toys, and they get all that energy at the beginning. The real key to the best of the best is the ones who go all the way to the end and make sure all of those last flats get sold with the same energy and the same enthusiasm and the same marketing.
I don't think the teams today have the same stamina. We used to have huge stamina to stay with these schemes and to keep reinventing them and reinventing ways of selling them and so on. It's not there.
And you do, you know, especially when there's 200, 300, 400 flats in a block. I mean, it is a lot of energy. I
dream to sell stuff like that. We would be to the bitter end, but you can see it in development. You know, there's always those last 6 or 7 that just don't seem to sell.
No. Okay, well, there we are. I'm going to say a big thank you to Steve Wayne, owner of Benjamin Stevens Estate Agents. Thank you for coming in.
See you.
David Galman, property consultant, formerly director of Galliard Homes. Thank you for coming in.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you both for imparting your knowledge to our viewers. I'm sure they'll all be very grateful. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.